But from a perspective of a program, what I'm saying is that these people on a whole are not a good risk in a program with little oversight, and that many will exploit it and steal. And that I've also seen how a small amount of people can make a really bad impact, right? One burglar, I've seen one burglar burglarize 48 houses in a 5-mile radius. 48 families had to deal with that. It was one person. One person can make a big impact, and that's important too. And that social workers are often responsible for enormous caseloads. In Sacramento County, between consumers and providers, we have anywhere between 40 to 45,000 people. Currently, we have 45 social workers overseeing that. They're doing the best they can, but do you think that they catch it all? Of course not. And yet, they're our #1 referral source. So we know that there's a lot that just isn't being caught. And that's part of why my team is reaching out to the community, reaching out to others to understand what it is and to know how important it is that this program be protected. Some of the types of fraud that we see over and over in Sacramento that I've seen throughout the state, the first 2 categories have to do with jail or death cases, skilled nursing facilities, SNF, or hospital cases. Those are when either the provider or the consumer is in jail or in the hospital or dead. Those make up the bread and butter of my caseload and most caseloads throughout the state. That's because those are the easiest to catch. I know that some of these things also happen by people that don't understand, and that's why I also know that community education is so important, so that nobody claims time when it shouldn't be claimed, so that those dollars remain. I've talked to you about already the phantom cases, where the recipient is really the consumer is really the provider. There's no care, it's just false on paper. I've seen people, right now my team is investigating, about to file charges on a case, a man that lived out of state, got a call for the IRS, about $88,000 of unreported income. He doesn't even live in California. He didn't know what it was about. Turns out his identity was stolen here in California, and it was used to enroll him as a provider. $88,000 went out. He wasn't even in the state. I'd hate to be him right now, try to undo that with the federal government, right? I've worked with identity thief victims before. I know how hard it is to unring that bell. But I also know how easy it was for that person to do that, and I know we need to address that on the front end. People like the man I told you, the 141,000, people that exaggerate or outright fabricate their claim of need. They just come to the program to steal from the dollars, and they're able to do that because, well, in my county, you know, the social workers have 500 to 600 cases each, and it's going to go up because there's 800 more being banked. They're going to redistribute. There's not very many opportunities for them to put eyes on the program. Doctors that are submitting forms often don't understand it, and so they, sign forms not really understanding what they're doing. And social workers in my county, they're doing yearly reassessment visits, 18 months, 24 months, it's getting longer because they just can't get to them. They're trying, they just can't do it. So that means when someone gets into the program and wants to, steal, they're gonna get in and have a long time potentially before anyone has eyes on that situation. That's beautiful for them. We have cases in our pediatric unit where parents have claimed that one parent was working out of the home when they really were not. Both parents were in the home available because they were both unemployed, to high loss of the program. A woman right now, $60,000 of loss to the program, which could have been prevented if we had verified on the front end that the employment was taking place. That's part of what my team wants to do in this upcoming year, is when employment is part of the eligibility, we should check that out. This particular family just put a white piece of paper, somebody typed on like old school typewriter, oh, he works for me full time, and signed it. It was his cousin. It wasn't true. Better if we could have caught that on the front end, and that $60,000 was still in the program. And then cases of elder dependent abuse or neglect are, to me, the worst, because not only are they abusing or neglecting a dependent adult or elder, but they're actually being paid to care for them. So that's even worse. In those particular circumstances in my county, we would hand it to our elder dependent abuse unit, but we'd support them however we could with the IHSS information, because that's an important part of the picture too. They were getting paid to care for somebody. They should have done it, and instead someone got hurt. So here's the challenge of measuring IHSS fraud as I've seen it over this past year. I use the two symbols. One is a glass of water, and the other is a river. And the glass of water I use just because it's a container and it has liquid in it, although I suppose I could have used a bank. Because it's the example of if a crime happens at one time, maybe let's say a bank robbery. Once that robbery is over, you can go in and take an accounting of how much money was stolen. You can look at it and get a pretty reasonable idea of how much was stolen. You could talk to witnesses and review surveillance and get an idea of how many people committed that crime. IHSS fraud is much more challenging. It's not like something that happened at one point in time and is over. It is ongoing, and there's 58 counties throughout the state. It's ongoing in all different ways. All those different types of ways I described IHSS fraud, that's not all the ways it's happening, I'm sure, but those are the ways, the major ways we see. And so in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different places, it's happening on an ongoing basis. And so it's more like a river. And it's really hard to measure a river. And so I personally do not believe there's any reliable statistics statewide right now about how much fraud there is. The numbers, whatever numbers that you get, are like a sample from the stream. I look at a piece, maybe an indicator. In my own county, we received 1,324 fraud referrals last year. That just means like a police report, like a suspected crime. We were able to look at 588 of those. We couldn't get to 736 or whatever the difference was. We looked at 588 of them. And of those 588 that had overpayments, and I'm sorry I can't tell you, I think it was like 500 did and 88 didn't, or something along those lines. Of the ones that had what we could at least say were overpayments, money had left the program when it should not have. It's too soon to say if it's criminal intent. We have to have a full investigation and contact all the witnesses and gather all the evidence before if we know it's a crime. But we know that the money went out when it should not. Over $2 million for that 500 we looked at. $2 million is not the stream. It's a sample from the stream. But it tells us it's a lot of money, and it tells us that we need to stop that from going out. And so we're looking at ways we can do that. And just before I wrap up, our approach is to use a multidisciplinary approach, to work with social workers, to communicate with our public authority, to work with others in the field, to do as much as we can in prevention, which has a lot to do about education and outreach. We work with our public authority on the provider training. We supplemented the state materials. We put out articles in their Caring Matters newsletter that comes out twice a year. We reach out, and whatever group wants us to come and talk, anybody that wants to hear me, I'll come and talk to them about it. Early detection, we're working on making our different databases speak to each other more often. Sacramento was like most counties around the state. They had to rely on the state data for people who had died, which would come about 3 to 4 months after the fact. And then by the time our investigators could work it, maybe it was 4 to 6 months after the fact. So when I first started prosecuting on the death cases where somebody had claimed time after a consumer had died, it was about 6 months of loss, 4 to 6 months on average. We've tightened that up in Sacramento County because now we look at that data on a monthly basis, which is how quickly we can get it from the coroner's office. And although by the time we catch it, a month of pay has already gone out, at least it's a month and not 4 to 6. That's just a start. There's many databases that should be speaking to one another. There are many agencies that should be speaking to one another. We need to prevent as much fraud as we can. Whatever we can't prevent, we need to catch it as early as we can to stop it. There's ways that that can be done, and I'm sorry because of time, I can't tell you all the ways that we're doing it, but there are ways that can be done. Anybody I speak to, I like to talk about, thank you, ways that they can do that. IHSS fraud hurts everyone. It hurts everyone that the program was designed to serve, and it hurts counties at a time when they do not have money to pay for basic municipal services that everyone needs. So we need to do as much as we can to work together, collaborate together to prevent IHSS fraud and overpayments. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, but here is my direct number and my email address, and I welcome any questions or anything you may have in the future. Thank you for your time. Hi, Annette. Good to see you. Okay, I'll see you next time. Yeah.
I have a question regarding how fraud is being publicized with this upcoming election and probably thereafter, whether it's in a gubernatorial positioning or local positions. And as far as the position of advocacy where we stand, I think we need to be equipped where those dollars are being frauded from, not from individual recipient provider. Because we are the one out in the public that can get easily attacked by this, not the institutions. We need some samples tools to be able to educate when we are in front of legislators, we're in front of anybody that would, again, this position says to be marginalized. Yes. One more notch. So I'm hoping that your task force can provide this organization some statistical facts that, you know, this is where that 1 billion deficit is committed for fraud. Break it down to where it went out to, and because rather than being individually attacked, because that is what we're facing.
Right. Well, I can't speak for any numbers that the state put out or what a billion. I can't account for any of that. But I am always happy to share with the work that my team has found. We made our full report to our advisory committee last month, following our actually before we spoke to our board of supervisors. I'm always willing to to talk to people about that, but I can't account for anything on the state level. I just don't have access to that data. But I do think it's important that individual people that are working in the program honestly not feel that they're the ones being attacked, because that's not the case, at least in my task force. And it's unfortunate in the first place that you have to feel that way, because it puts a wedge between people that should be working together. And so anything I can do to take away that wedge, I'm happy to do.
Laura, we have Greg Thompson on the phone, who can speak to LA County statistics. And LA County, as you're well aware, is the largest county in the state. It represents about 40%. Greg, did you want to make comment at this point?
Yes, how much time, like 5 minutes maybe?
Just go ahead. We'll stop you when you have to.
Okay, I think the first thing I'd like to say is that I fully support what Ms. West is doing and her approach. I think that absolutely we want to protect the IHSS recipients. The issue that I have is with the current administration and the fact that they attacked the program and created this stigma that it was filled with fraud and all these criminals. And so in an attempt to try to come up with some kind of way to measure it, we worked with RTC and we did a couple of studies. And I think if you want to, I don't know if they were passed out or not, but there's one sheet there that actually talks about the convictions. And so when the governor makes a statement that there's 25% of the program is filled with fraud, actually, no, I think the wrong sheet. If you look at there's another sheet that's entitled Conviction Data, Legacy Perspective in LA County. And we looked at 120,083 background checks. And there are 9 categories that you see listed on that page would be considered fraud. And you can see that in total we found 1,371 unduplicated individuals who either had a felony or a misdemeanor conviction for one of those fraud categories, which is 1.14%. So when they say that the program is filled with 25% fraud, we looked at a pretty large sample size and we found about 0.14%. And then even more importantly, the second sheet that talks about the conviction data. This was even more alarming because in the last couple of weeks before the budget was actually passed, there was some articles, one particularly damaging, that stated that the program had all these dangerous criminals awaiting assignment to take care of our most vulnerable population. And so what we did again, RTC looked at 124,642. And that's a very large sample size. It's probably 40% of the people that were working in LA County as providers or who were attempting to be providers. And we took the proposed IHSS extended disqualifying crime list, and we found 1.29% of those applicants actually fell into those categories. And if you look on that sheet, for instance, look at, know Diane mentioned Penal Code 273A, child abuse.